And I'd like to start by introducing our panel. So I'm Professor Saeema Ahmed-Kristensen. I'm the director of the Digital Lab and also Professor of Engineering, Design and Innovation at the University of Exeter. Our team's based in London by the South Bank. And I'd like to introduce Jonathan. Would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Jonathan Eyre. I'm a Senior Technical Fellow at the Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre as part of the University of Sheffield, and I specialise in digital twins, leading a lot of our larger digital transformation programmes.
Thank you. And Ben, are you able to join us?
I am. Thank you very much, Saeema. And apologies, Evan, I've got a poor internet connection, so my video is on at the moment, but I will turn it off. I'm Professor Ben Hicks. I'm from the University of Bristol, where I head up engineering systems and design. For the last 25 years, I've worked in computer-aided design, building information modelling, product lifecycle management, sort of model-based systems engineering and multi-physics simulation. And all of those aspects have sort of led me over the last 5 or 7 years to be working in the areas of digital twins. As a research group, we're quite large, about 100 researchers, and we're working across digital twins in the context of production systems. So the whole production system plus machine tool level to drive efficiency and flexibility. We're also doing a lot in the area of infrastructure, so things like bridges and flood defence systems. So Clifton Suspension Bridge in Bristol, we have a digital twin of the bridge. And the drivers there with the twin were really about improving the accuracy of the models, the digital models, and improving that predictive capability so that essentially we can keep, if any of you have visited Bristol, congestion, like all cities, is awful. But if we can keep that bridge open longer, then that's much better for the city. And then the third area is around sort of high value products, so things like wind turbines. And just to get you all thinking, an area that we're the last couple of years we've been doing more work in is around digital twins of supply chains and logistics, particularly things like meat distribution, and also working with a number of companies who are asking us the questions about cost benefit, and those companies are, I said, medium large organizations with not necessarily high value products, but they're asking how can they use a digital twin for innovation, which I think will be hopefully some of those areas and questions that we'll cover in this session. So lovely to meet you all and looking forward to the session.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ben and Jonathan. I'm going to just start by setting a little bit of context. So this is one of 5 seminars that we've done for Digital Innovation Week with our partners, digital leaders. And this is the last one in that series. And we're part of Digital Lab. So Digital Lab is a funded UKRI centre. So that means it's funded by the taxpayers' money for research and also industry and in-kind contributions from university. So it's about a 12.4 million centre, which is 5 years programme. And we're about a year and a bit into our programme. We're funded by EPSRC from 2 parts of EPSRC. So one was the digital economy theme that's supporting the use of digital technologies. And the second half is manufacturing the future. So manufacturing is one of our relevant sectors, but it's not the only sector that we work across. Within that Digital Lab, we have several different themes. So they run from technology testbeds, business models, organizational systems, employee well-being, and digital innovation. And it's that last theme, which is not the only one where we may have digital twins, but one of the ones where we're looking at the possibility of digital twins. So we could just move to the next slide, please, Jonathan. So one of the transitions that was taking place, if you think about products in terms of, you could think about them as services, but also as physical products. So when we're talking about manufacturing, they can be engineering B2B products, but they could also be B2C, to consumers involved. And the transition that is expected to take place or is taking place with digital technologies is a move from products through to smart products, to smart connected products, and through to product service systems and systems of systems. And when we move all this way through, this is talking about a lot of data, a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of stakeholders involved. And so as we go through this transition, one of the directions that we're looking at in digital innovation is how do we support products from moving from this left-hand side all the way through to systems of systems. And digital twins is one of the areas that is of interest here because it's data that's collected across different industries, and together can be used for innovation in there. If we could just move to the next slide, please. So as this session's on digital twins, and I think that there's a lot been done in manufacturing, the first bit is just to start with a very quick definition. Ben, can I draw on you for your definition, because it's yours?
You can. If anyone's looked at definitions of digital twins, there's a plethora. This definition was developed with the Government Office of Science, so I can't claim total credit. If I have done, I apologise, as this is being recorded. But the important thing is that this definition has been synthesised really from NASA's original definitions, and there's 3 features of a digital twin that are really important. And if all 3 features aren't present, then it's probably not a digital twin. Those features are, number one, there has to be a collection of one or more computational representations of the physical asset. The second part is there has to be a flow of real-time data or near real-time, which is appropriate for the system or decision-making processes. And the third aspect is that digital twin, there has to be an ability to control the physical or interact with the physical asset. So if you want, that's closing the loop from the digital models through to some way of interacting with the physical, then collecting the data and back to the digital model. And you'll come across lots of definitions, and I get on my hobby horse here. If you look at one of the challenges around digital twins has been the issues of conflation and conceptual stretching, and some level of dissonance, where lots of vendors and existing companies will say, well, it's almost a digital twin, so we'll call it a digital twin, when in fact it isn't. It's a collection of models, could be for virtual prototyping, etc. But I think the important thing here, again, are those 3 features: collection of computational representations or models, flow of real-time data from the physical to the digital, and then some way or means for the digital to remotely interact or control the physical asset. And one of the images there is a good example of Rolls-Royce Eyre engines, where they will actually, in real time, in flight, those engines will be continually modified or adjusted according to the data that's sent back to the control room, the simulation models and modeling that's undertaken, and then they're automatically adjusted in flight. So that's a great example of a product or product service system that comprises all 3, a digital twin system that comprises all 3 of those features. Thank you, Saeema. Sorry to labour on that.
No, that's absolutely perfect. And that's a really important point, that definitions are quite important in digital twins, but we don't want all our presentation to be about the definition. So we're going to just move to some different examples. So, sorry, if we could just go back one slide. Sorry, Jonathan. So that definition that's there and the example, that's largely come out of manufacturing and engineering, where they've been one of the early adopters of digital twins as a tool. What we're seeing now are trends in other contexts. So we're seeing healthcare, for example. We're seeing issues around there in terms of understanding, can we make digital twins of human beings? Can we collect data that represents patients? Can we collect cognitive data or behavioral data? And of course, there's issues around privacy in those contexts. But there's also a lot of promise. So on an individual level, it refers to personalized care, maybe nudging, preventative nudges to prevent behavior that will prevent long-term conditions, for example, as well as tailorizing care and medicine. But on population level, we've heard a lot about digital twins in terms of informing policy. So some of the challenges around this are, of course, about this being able to speak together in terms of interoperability, in terms of standards, in terms of privacy. And one of the other directions we're seeing in terms of research is synthetic data when it comes to having data of individuals in there. And those are some of the directions. And I know, Jonathan, you've been doing a lot of work on standards and how digital twins move to talking to each other when you move away from just one single context. So perhaps we can switch over to yourself now, please.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Ben's given a really good overview of certainly articulating the key points, but a lot of people are coming at this from standards and saying, well, where are the standards backing up that space? Well, they are there. So just to highlight 3 of them that are coming out and have come out for the top 2. So ISO 23247 is the manufacturing framework for digital twins. And I'll not read it out, but it's the same concept of you've got something that you want to digitally represent, you've got some way of gathering data about it, Ben called this sort of real-time or near real-time aspect. In the standards, they are agreeing around synchronization or convergence, depending on the definitions on this page. And it's also about getting that synchronization into these digital representations from something you can observe. So something physically exists. What's really interesting then moving into Flex 260, which is just a BSI standard, is that it actually references the ISO. So they say, actually, we are following most of 23247. We've just tweaked it to suit the built environment. So those two are coming much more from an operational aspect of sectors. Now, the bottom right image there is actually from Flex 260. And that is saying, look, we know there needs to be some top level umbrella or roof of terms that we agree on to enable convergence. But we understand there is going to be sort of nuances between the sectors to allow people to tweak and make those modifications. Now, the third one I've got is actually in public draft, and that is finishing today, actually. So if anyone is active in digital twin space and want to make some comments, feel free. What's interesting here is this is an IEC standard, which means it's coming from the IT background rather than OT, so information technology rather than operational technology. So they've actually changed and tweaked some things again. Again, nobody can seem to agree yet, but we are seeing convergence towards more of, we have target entities rather than observable elements, i.e. could be a server, could be more of actual IT hardware that you want to have data connections with to get that synchronization. So again, we don't want to dwell on it today. We think there's much better examples to talk around and have discussions around, but pointing out the standards are working in this space. They are out there. Go read and see what you think. So really some of the other points that we are trying to get across is these things may sound unintuitive when you're reading the definitions, but really, as the pen really clearly identified, is if you have these three parts, it's stuff we've already been doing. People think it's new and that it's a new, exciting way of doing things. And a lot of marketing is, oh, we're close to having a digital twin. We're going to call it digital twin because that will help our sales. Well, it doesn't really help the overall sectors getting towards that space. But if you look back to the early examples, NASA here, and Ben's example comes from NASA definition as well, is about presenting that data more intuitively. It's about seeing what's happening, being able to make modifications with data-driven decisions, not just, I think that's right with the information I have available. Not sure if there's anything you want to add there, Ben?
Just to say, absolutely, Jonathan, and the thing that's really changed is when NASA, back in, I think, lots of John Vickers, etc., Apollo 13, when they proposed digital twins, it was for them, it was potentially significant cost savings in moving from physical twins, which is what they used to do. They would keep one of everything back on, so all their space vehicles, etc. There'll be an identical physical artifact which they would retain, and that started to become very costly. So that for them, they started to look at a digital twin or some combination thereof, which is actually what happened for Apollo 13. And it was still expensive, but relatively for NASA, there were cost savings and operational improvements. I think what's really changed over the last 10, 15 years, as you said, Jonathan, it's been around for a while, but data is cheap. We can capture with IoT, we can capture data easily, we can curate it, we can analyze it, the machine learning, etc. And simulation and multi-physics simulation is far more accessible now to everyone. So there's a real opportunity to access and use digital twins. The challenge, of course, is where the value lies and the cost benefit of the digital twin, and what are the compelling, how do you make a compelling business case for it, and how do you use that for innovation, etc.
Yeah, value is really difficult to articulate sometimes when it's just one aspect, but hopefully on the next slide, some examples start to see how you value things. So the one on the left there, the car dashboard, is you don't need to go and look in your fuel tank to realize how much fuel you've got. We've got a gauge for that. We've got a dashboard and a way of visualizing what is currently happening on a physical system. Now, this may be when you're sat in the driver's seat, you can see this information, but now with the new Tesla cars, you've got that on your phone as an application. So it's the ability to see and visualize where you need it. Weather dashboards, a lot of people still prefer to look at their phone than look out the window, but it's still a way of visualizing and seeing what's happening out there wherever you are in the world. In the middle of the traffic, there's so many of us now which either go to our car and put in the sat nav in the car with Android Auto or Apple equivalents, and see what is the best way of getting from A to B. And that live traffic is another example of this is our way of twinning the real world to have this virtual representation of what we want to see and what we want to have value there. So they already exist, they're already really common, and we just don't necessarily call them twins all the time. So we keep talking around things that we need and the components. There's some really early research that came out from ourselves on behalf of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult that the AMRC sits within. So if you want to learn more around the components that are required or what people think, we still find a lot of this research coming through, especially with regards to sort of that bottom graph there around 3D isn't essential. People still think it needs to be this really feature-rich 3D model that you can play around with and understand the kinematics of it and visualize it. Not necessarily. If you can have a dashboard or some way of accessing the information you need, that's all you need. You don't need a really intense 3D model that you're trying to run on a mobile phone, which needs then cloud rendering and everything else. The cost benefit wouldn't make sense there. So moving into some of the other work that's been going on then. So we've seen the Flex 260, which started to build these cross-sectoral relationships. So there's a recent piece of work come out with the IET that I was part of producing with AMRC and also Tech UK and CLC, so the Construction Leadership Council, what was previously the Centre for Digital Built Britain, which has now found its new home in the Connected Places Catapult, Alan Turing Institute. There's lots of people been saying, actually, we need to start breaking down these cross-sectoral boundaries. We need to start having conversations to say, actually, how should digital twins and broader information management principles come together to actually unlock value for a lot of people? So this is a position piece. It's been out now for a couple of months, but go take a read, looking at an approach for how we should actually facilitate conversations and start to break down some of the big challenges. Now, we've tried to not boil the ocean and tried to get to four large categories of exploration. So performance, circularity, human capital, and value. Now, these are a starting point, but we've just had our first hack yesterday, exploring value and what value means to people, and also trying to get use cases where they're saying, actually, this would give us value, but we can't do that because of X, Y, and Z. And then we're saying, actually, well, let's try and solve those challenges to actually make a difference and have an impact. As Ben alerted to earlier, there's a lot of people still wanting to finesse the wording. We're actually not going and cracking on with things, in my experience as an engineer, to go, actually, let's try and solve some of these problems and move forward, as a lot of people on this call are sort of positions today. So if you want to get involved and are working between manufacturing and built environment, or just want to see the outputs of what we're doing, feel free to sign up to the network on the Digital Twin Hub.
Great, thank you. So that's a really important initiative to look at how digital twins can talk and communicate across sectors. From your workshops, Jonathan, have you seen something about what sort of value people are talking about in their sectors? What is the advantage of going beyond one area? Yeah, so value is an interesting term in itself. People often think pounds and pence of ultimately it's going to cost me money. So the CFO or Chief Financial Officer needs to sign it off. But there's actually some work that came out of the Construction Innovation Hub articulating value in 20 different ways. And when it is just pounds and pence, people go, I'll pay a little bit more and get a slightly better quality product. But actually, when there's 20 different things that you're trying to balance out, it's very difficult to articulate. So what happened yesterday was we were starting to say, actually, what do you want with your products? And manufacturers were very broadly going, I want to understand how it's being used. And then the built environment people saying, well, why do you need that? And they're going, well, actually, if I know how it's being used, I can either remove features or reduce the factor of safety, which would decrease weight, which would give a better quality performance. Or if they've changed the materials on a pump or whatever else, does that actually help produce or increase the quality of maintenance scheduling? Is it actually longer before it needs maintenance? So if they keep tweaking things and never get the feedback, how are they supposed to know if to not revert back to what it used to be for performance or circularity or things? So it's not just a case of manufacturer want to produce better things. It's the built environment need to provide that information back, but also then the built environment people can go in a very broad sense,
oh, well, clients liked this because it gave them X benefit. So actually, do they want more often maintenance because that's what they're happy with? But that means that they can actually afford a cheaper pump and they're just going to accept that it's going to be replaced a lot more often, to allow them to make that conscious decision rather than just going, oh, we're assuming the manufacturing people are always going to get the absolute best out there for us, and then we're just working off data sheets. There needs to be a lot more feedback between these things. So it's a two-way street, and certainly a lot of the benefits are going to come from these ongoing conversations of what does it mean to each of us to articulate those use cases.
Great. So this is an opportunity for companies who are interested. They can join your workshops by going to one of those two links. And I believe the one that you ran yesterday is online next week.
That's correct, yeah. So we won the first one yesterday in Sheffield, our Factory 2050 building. The next one is the online call that you just mentioned on Thursday. And if you follow the network, you'll see the link there. That's an online Zoom call, and it's exploring the same theme of value for those further afield from Sheffield. But we are working our way around the country between these different things. So we've got one in Coventry or Anstey at the MTC, and then we've got another one in Birmingham at the IET, and then the final one is at the IET in London. So that's the final ones around human capital and skills, which comes up in near enough all conversations around digital twins at the moment of what skills do we need, and then how can we best support all of our sectors. But yeah, reach out if you've got any questions, and we'll come and take part.
Great. And so as we're talking about value, as AMRC, you've already worked with a number of different sectors to look at digital twins and what's the value that can be created back to them. Can we talk through some examples that you have, please?
Sure. So move on. So one of the early pieces of work, or earlier on pieces of work, was trying to get shop floor connectivity, and still is to a large extent. We've had it for years in oil and gas and manufacturing to an extent with SCADA systems, but a lot of those architectures are now struggling to scale, or when they're trying to get to thousands and thousands of devices, aren't quite at the level of interoperability or sort of performance that they're needing as they're starting to scale into a lot more sensing. So we've done some work connecting shop floor project PLCs, so programmable logic controllers. So actually, these ability to dashboards is something we've done for a long time, is to having interactive mechanisms to support it. What's really important for digital twins going forward is once you start to have that data in a common structure that you can easily read, is you can build prediction loops on top. So at the top right there, we have a feedback loop for a discrete event simulation. And what that's able to do is to predict the remaining time of what this process is taking. Now, what that enables overall is some form of prediction. It's that ability to go, okay, I know what's happening right now. I can trust, I can supervise the system. But actually then we're predicting on top of that to go, okay, let's look at what that would mean for production scheduling. So by being able to know what we're doing at a cell level, companies are now able to look at saying, okay, what's the knock-on effect of that shop floor? When do I need the forklift drivers to come and actually now take the product away? What's the effect of storage? When am I going to run out of storage? There's the delay of logistics, not being able to take products away. There's looking at sort of the butterfly effect of, yes, you can have digital twins for small cells, but that fits within an organization, which fits within a supply chain, which fits within whole ecosystems of our sectors. And it's just about people being able to have these data-driven decisions, as we've already said, to go, what can we do in the future to make the best use of everything? The other one then that's come out, and it wasn't something we specifically worked on, but a good use case from another sector, and you'd already mentioned healthcare earlier, just around a solution called Early Warning by a company called ThoughtWire, decreased blue events, code blue events by 6%, so the people going into cardiac arrest. And that was from relatively simple and straightforward deployments of IoT, where they actually had alerts and collaboration. But the real benefit was one, they understood the sector really well, and two, it meant that actually that ability to provide the collaborative environment between nurses, doctors, and emergency response teams means they can detect and provide benefit to patients to ultimately save more lives or decrease stays in intensive care, which really helps for some of this stuff, and it stops that reactive nature. It starts to become more of a predictive and an efficient health service for what they were doing over there. So hopefully another example where people see it's not just manufacturing, which are or doing a lot in this space. A lot of other sectors are really starting to benefit as well now. And finally, just around the smart home, something that we don't label as digital twin, but it is in so many regards, in terms of we have this ability for monitoring what's happening, energy consumption, temperature of rooms, and a lot of that comes down to convenience and functionality. A lot of it is what we want to do, and it might be just remote controlling when your heating's on and off. It may be controlling thermostats wirelessly, but all this interactive ability, to Ben's earlier point as well, back to his sort of first slide, was around we want to be able to change things. Is that lights? Is that devices on and off? It's that ability to interact with our homes, but also then predict. So how can we make the best use of things? There's a government initiative at the moment with energy tariffs where it's now on a variable rate, and it's variable because it's cheaper on the evenings and sort of over the night period. So if you have a smart, as what seems to be labelled everything now, smart this, smart that. If you have a smart washing machine, which you can tell it when to start, you can actually use it at the cheapest tariff available for that night, overall saving you money, and then it's ready for the morning as if it was no different anyway. So these sorts of things are ways of controlling mechanisms, which overall helps the energy grid, helps the local network, and bandwidth of sending power around. So a few examples there, hopefully, that give people thought.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Jonathan. If we just move to some questions, I'm sure we've got plenty on the actual case studies and the examples given. So we have one question coming from Jane, or Maniac Jane, sorry, regarding the construction phase. So how is a digital twin different from a 3D model? And when industries such as refineries are constructed, sorry, let me just read that question. How digital twin is different from a 3D model when industries such as refineries are constructed? So in the use phase, how is digital twins different from SCADA or DCS operator dashboards provided by companies such as Honeywell? And I guess that refers back to the definitions of digital twins. Ben, do you want to pick that up first?
I certainly can. I mean, there's two interrelated questions there. I'll try and answer Jane Mayank. Is that? Apologies for pronunciation. I think, you know, in manufacturing, what you're seeing is that the digital twins, I would say, there are a lot of case studies from manufacturing production, because a lot of the existing capital expenditures already there, so that most production systems have some level of quality assurance, quality control, monitoring, etc. And then they have the SCADA system, of course, which gives all that information and data. So I guess the digital twin in the production context is I think that's why we see so many examples. It's another layer that then allows you to do things like, if your material properties were changing, or your production, your quality your efficiency had reduced, you would then take all that data, run a discrete event simulation, your model, physics-based model or discrete event simulation model, check what would explore what changes to the parameters, what that impact that might have on your quality and efficiency, determine the optimum set, and then feed that back onto the production line, you know, automatically. And what you're doing there, in a sense, it's a learning loop, and you're saving time. That would be done manually, normal, through trial and error and experts coming on, or change this, increase that. And so that's probably the real difference. So in production, I always see digital twins as an additional layer, and those companies who have implemented, and Siemens have done a lot of work in this space as well, quite successfully with production, with manufacturers. It's been that additional layer and getting that additional value out in terms of efficiency and flexibility. But if I can, it sort of relates to, there's another question from Alan that preceded that was around how do you ensure a digital twin is more than a disconnected, limited model of a system. I would say to Alan, it's in science, when it's all in the definitions. You know, you can have a digital model, and that's not a digital twin, that's just a digital model. And of course, when we build models, we'll do some verification and validation. So we'll get some data from the physical system to demonstrate that we have confidence in our digital model. And we might have a collection of digital models where we transfer the data between them. A digital shadow then, which was defined again in the original definitions by NASA, is where you actually, and there's some good examples of digital shadows, where actually you take all the data, periodically take the data from the physical system, run that in your models, and then you can do some reasoning and some analysis. And a good example of a company that's doing that now for the National Rail system or infrastructure is IOTICS. So at the end of every day, all the data from that infrastructure is downloaded, and then you can look at where rolling stock is and plan accordingly for the next day. The level then for your digital model, digital shadow, the digital twin then is actually about connecting all those elements up. So in the example Jonathan showed around smart homes, if you look at where we are in the built environment, and Jonathan alluded to this, if you look at the sort of sites or assets now, yes, you can control everything automatically, but what the models, the digital models will be doing is looking at what's the incoming weather conditions. Is it going to be cold tonight? So we'll actually take the decision not to open all the windows, even though it's quite hot, because actually it saves money for the next 24-hour period by not. So it takes that automated decision. So the levels are increasing levels of connectivity. I hope that answers your question, Alan and Jane.
Yeah, the other example I've heard there, Ben, as well, is a steel foundry where keeping the doors open or turning the heating on just before they fire up the heart furnace. It's like, it's about to get really warm in here. You don't need to put the heating on. And it's those sorts of decisions that sound intuitive, but without the data to back them up, can't be done.
Great. So I think what we're hearing is really about action, something happening beyond just looking at these digital models and having something that actually influences the physical model in there. In those examples that we have, there's something that comes through about prediction. It's prediction of scheduling, prediction of faults, predicting the weather, and it extends all the way into the health example, where it's actually really a big challenge and quite meaningful to the impact to the patient's quality of life and to the service. As we start looking at these broader questions, what opportunities do you see for digital twins? Can we move beyond predictions? And you've got circularity in your in part of your diagram there, Jonathan, and part of those 4 workshops. If we start looking at you alluded to the energy crisis, you've alluded to some of the big challenges that we're facing globally. Is there some opportunities as we start talking with digital twins that talk together to address some of these challenges? Where do you see the innovations? And that's for either of you.
Yeah, I'll take you first. I'm sure Ben's got different ideas as well, but I think when people are still using the term digital twin, they are still referring to a lot of wider information management. So a lot of it within the built environment, they are still pushing building information modeling or BIM as their digital twin. But really, a lot of it, or still the current consumption at sort of level 2, is still more around that sort of digital modeling aspect of we want to describe what we are about to do without actually any connection to what is going off. But what it means is if we have access to this BIM data once a building's finished or whatever else, then you've got the ability to use that information afterwards. So that's a very broad statement, but to provide an example, when there is a derelict building available, there is still resources left in that building. There's still a lot of steel, a lot of concrete. And if we know what resources are left and we know there's, a steel shortage or whatever else in the local area, we know which buildings to go and take down first to access the steel, to recycle it, to actually have a new input into the manufacturing process. And without the data to back that up, you can't be done. You'd just be guessing, going, oh, that looks a bit taller building, so we know we think it should have more steel, or it's more of a high rise, so it's going to have more steel. So it's about having connections that we've not seen, which often when it's that sort of thing of transport and everything else, it's not the transport costs that we're trying to get out there ultimately. It's the fact of let's not keep digging up raw materials where a lot of the energy is being consumed to produce these assets in the first place. I forget the exact number, but it's like 78% of energy production is in actually digging it up the ground in that first processing. So if we can reuse and recycle and remanufacture things, there's a lot of benefits that we can add to sort of people working in this space. And it's those connections which aren't immediately obvious that I think can have a lot of benefit overall.
Great. Ben, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, and I hope I'm going to try and let's say 2 birds, 1 stone. With Alan's got couple of other questions there.
Yes.
One of Alan's question, I think, is so does it come down to more data, better algorithms, and tighter feedback loops? I think what it comes down to, and I keep coming back to it, a digital twin is a learning loop. It's a way of learning and intervening in the physical system. So the answer to the question is, it's about what are your requirements of that learning loop. So we have a project with a large tier 1 aerospace manufacturer where we are asking the questions of cost benefit. So we have a set of 5 digital twins, one of which is just based on a simple interpolation of points in an Excel spreadsheet, running through to one which is based on image analysis using high-speed imagery and machine learning, and then one which is multi-physics based. And we've looked at the time, the cost to create and maintain those, and we're exploring what the cost benefit is in their context, and how do we know what fidelity of twin and data we actually need, what provides an improvement in the reasoning capability. So I think there's a lot of innovations in terms of, and I think it comes back to, Jonathan mentioned skills and so did Saeema. I think, digital twins, it's an engineering design problem, really. It's a design thinking problem. The digital twin is a learning loop. What are our requirements of that learning? What learning do we need? When do we need it? And how much what's the confidence level that we require in that learning loop? By way of example, you talked about innovation, Saeema, and said a couple of companies we've been working with. One makes a very common folding bike. And the question they asked of us is really, what can a digital twin do? They don't particularly want a digital twin of all their bikes and fleets, but what can a digital twin do in the context of their innovation processes? And we built a digital twin, which was, full multi-physics analysis, collecting a number of instrumented bikes out the road, collecting all that data, verifying and validating that, then created our digital twin. And then we were able to, it wasn't a real-time control of the bike, but what we were able to do was to modify the design, then they would produce another version of it and get out there quite quickly. So it wasn't immediate. They had to produce a physical asset in between, but it allowed them to answer questions and look at how they can electrify bikes, for example, and what the optimum configurations might be. So, and that was the first time, I think, for us that the company had approached us and said, how do I use a digital twin to support my innovation processes? Whereas I think a lot of the applications we've seen and the examples are around safety critical systems where you can't afford failure, or they're around production and manufacturing where you're trying to get increased levels of efficiency and flexibility. Thank you, Saeema.
Great, brilliant. We've got a whole host of questions. I'm going to start just going quickly through them. So the first one from Boyin is talking about digital twins. It's largely done in the manufacturing context. But one question would be here, what are the ethical issues that are commonly involved or observed when we're looking at data which is not just individual data?
So I can say a few words on that. We've one of the drivers in the region, Bristol Southwest region, is aerospace, and one of the challenges has been looking at things like digital twin, extended factories, so going beyond factories, and you start to run into lots of issues around who owns what data, who owns what models, who's got responsibility for them, how much data is exposed, and we were very interested in operators and what operators were doing, but again collecting data on operators and their just their location in the factory floor and how they move around is challenging to say the least. And you're absolutely right, there are a lot of considerations that as engineers we don't necessarily deal with those, but our colleagues in social sciences are looking at the ethical issues in terms of how you collect the data, how you anonymize, etc. And Saeema, you touched on the sort of artificial crowds and things like that. How do you actually generate surrogate data that can represent crowds and people without actually capturing an individual?
Personal data, yes, there's a move towards synthetic data, which I think has been used extensively in AI research already. But I think the things that you've just alluded to would be people be worried about their own performance being measured by their data being captured, for example, in there.
I think so.
Sorry, Jonathan.
I was just going to say, I think some of the ethical and wider cultural challenges around digital twins are probably bigger than the technological. Certainly seems that way at the moment. If we can collect this data, we know what we're doing and how to analyze it, but people don't want to either give it away across supply chains or actually within the more ethical issues, actually, like say, people being tracked on their performance of what's achieving things. Whether that blocks net zero or not is a different challenge, but there are some key blockers in sort of enabling some of this stuff.
And I guess there's concerns when you're discussing your Apollo program, where they're between industries, also relate to privacy and security of data, and not just the personalization and identity. The next question we've got from Marius is around immersive technologies such as VR, AR, XR, and what role do they play or could play in the development of digital twins?
It's an interesting question, and one that I still get a lot, actually. So my background is in XR, so that's where I started at AMRC, being an XR developer. I think they're an important part of the wider digital transformation programs in terms of design reviews and kind of things happening. But I certainly wouldn't call them a digital twin. I think they are enabling technologies within what's called cyber physical infrastructure, which is something that the BEIS, the government organisation, is looking at, and they certainly sit within that field, which is where also digital twins sit. But also as well, there are a lot of value still being driven by dashboards, and people have mentioned SCADA systems in the chat as well. Those give most of the way there. So then when you're starting to look towards XR, yes, an AR overlay of something is perfect. Or if you've got a really high fidelity model that you're trying to visualize and you're nowhere near site, yes, throw that in VR and see what's happening within the sense. So you've got the understanding, because picture paints 1,000 words sort of thing. You can clearly see when looking at it where the items are, how they're moving, the issues, how to go and diagnose it, which may also then help somebody in AR actually in the field understand what problems are. So certainly for prognosis and sort of diagnostics of things, we are seeing technologies like XR have value, but not necessarily over everything else. Don't know, Ben, curious to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think there's two separate things here, which again often get a little conflated, and there's a digital twin, and then it's certainly in the built environment. We use something called the living laboratory. And a digital twin, it's incredibly difficult to predict crowds, let alone individuals, and how behavior changes if you alter, for example, the typology of the building. But one way to do that, we use certainly in the context of what we call One City at Bristol, we use digital twins of the city and the built environment in combination with living laboratories, which can themselves then use these sorts of technologies, because you can use your living lab to provide input then in learning into your digital twin. So the living laboratory is again another way of generating understanding. It's another learning loop, like a digital twin, but they're complementary, and in particular that's what we would use in the context of the built environment, and trying to capture value for users, if you want, and how the movement patterns and behaviors change if you change a building, because those are incredibly difficult to predict computationally. So a living laboratory is actually a good way of doing that, and those sorts of VR, AR, XR are fundamental to things like living laboratories. So I see them as complementary streams, and certainly in the context of product design and manufacturing as well, they're complementary.
Great. We've got another question, and I guess this probably relates to the use case examples that we've talked about, from Fatima, saying, thank you for your descriptions and presentations. How can we evaluate the performance of digital twin models? So we've seen lots of different use cases, and I guess you can evaluate them for your particular use case. But what about digital models that are there and can be used for multiple cases? What sort of evaluations would a company need to say this is the right way forward and a good investment?
So I can have a go at that. In the current project we have with a large aerospace manufacturer, there's very little work on cost benefit and actually performance of digital twins. So at the moment we are measuring everything, including the carbon footprint of the digital twin and sitting in the cloud. I said everything from user time right the way through to, so we are measuring everything. We've got a very clear, in terms of the digital twin, we're predicting some aspects of GD and T, so geometric dimensioning and tolerancing. I can't say more than that. So we can very easily quantitatively evaluate the performance and predictions of the digital twin. We can measure the performance in terms of it has a very clear requirement in terms of the digital twin and its output. But then I said all the other factors we're measuring as well. And so again, that was the example I said to you where we have 5 different instances of the digital twin, and it's a trade-off between those, because there's creation time, skills required, etc., are all different. But there are quite a few, Fatima's answer, there are quite a few papers on sort of performance of image-based digital twins and different fidelities, etc. And again, they're all, the ultimate performance is that why question. What's your requirement of the digital twin? What knowledge do you need to learn? What understanding do you need? And then what confidence level do you require? So you can have a very high fidelity, sophisticated digital twin, but if you don't require something to 28 decimal places, then you don't need to invest in that. You might just need something that you want to, is it increasing, decreasing in the vectors of change, for example. So that was my point, Fatima, really about it's an engineering design problem, really, a design problem as to a digital twin system. What are the requirements? And there's not enough at the moment, and that's to the engineering design community as well, which Jonathan and Simon and myself are part of, is that how do you design a digital twin from scratch, and what are the skills required? Is design thinking, is that directly applicable, or is there an aspect of a blend of design thinking, model-based systems engineering, and sort of systems engineering or systems thinking?
Yeah, and I think that question is really neatly sort of shows the example of when you talk about the requirements and being part of the design thinking process, that makes it easier to understand how to evaluate in a particular case. Jonathan, as you move to your Apollo initiative, and we're doing digital twins or encouraging communities to come together of different sectors, and perhaps the value or the use case is not yet articulated, where do you see and how will you see how will evaluation take place, and what are the concerns of industry?
Yeah, I mean, Ben's almost answered that in the previous question, actually. I saw both of these in chat and thought they were very closely aligned. For me, Apollo's about starting to gather those use cases and always ask the question, why? Why are we trying to do something? Why do we need this? Why do we need that? Because if people can say why they need something and then it becomes a requirement, people then have that objective to come back and say, well, actually, did it matter? We've all used smart objectives to death and gone, well, as long as it's specific and measurable and all the other stuff, then you've got something to actually compare against. I think the trouble I'm seeing with, and the challenge faced with digital twins is, it's current platforms that are using a lot of the benefits at the moment. So as long as it's increasing performance or increasing and helping with maintenance, they're getting a benefit. They don't mind if they articulate it or not. So now when we're saying actually to do digital twins from day one, it's about how you gather that right from data requirements through to almost decommissioning in a lot of cases. So nuclear power stations, they have to put data in there, which they'll only consume in 50 years' time. So you need to know what you need to measure against to do it. But also, I think at the time, sort of where we are now in the marketplace, we are needing to work with sectors that have faster iteration loops, like consumer goods, to prove the benefits for aerospace for their next generation aircraft, because their design times are sort of a lot longer. So if we really want to get towards net zero in 2050, you can't choose something which you're only going to get feedback around in 10 years' time. We need to move faster than that. So certainly that co-creation, articulation of value and sort of that wider picture is what we're truly trying to get towards. So there's a second part of that around calculations of costs as well. Really, Apollo's about building on what we've already done before across the thing. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel. We want to learn from as much as other people and find mechanisms of articulating. Say, actually, the example Ben gave earlier with iotics, with the rail stuff, if that's been used in one location, great. Why is it not rolled out to wider organizations? So it's a case of, look, where there is value proven, let's quickly roll that out to other organizations, say, look, these have already got that value. Now, the challenge is, depending on the sector, people like their competitive edge, and people don't want to give away that information automatically. So it's about enabling that forum to come together and say, let's have open discussions, let's publish stuff open source afterwards to go, right, let's be honest about this stuff, because otherwise we're going to be too late for tackling some of the bigger challenges.
Great. I think we've got one last, I think it's more a comment than a question, from Maniac saying, coming from an instrumental engineering background and building refineries, and perplexed with the many standards and definitions and transitions over the years. And having seen transition from pneumatic to hydraulic systems to wireless systems, focuses now on data analysis and creating new values. And I think that's what we've just been talking about in that context. So focus has always been on complex system thinking and mapping, optimization, data issues, and creating value. So perhaps digital twin is another term which finds its own niche and application in time. And that, Ben, I know you've mapped out some of the skill sets that you think are relevant for digital twins. Perhaps you want to comment in relation to that.
I think we're all in vehement agreement with that statement, that I think all those challenges of systems thinking, optimization, data issues, they're all very relevant to designing your digital twin and the performance of the digital twin. And, you know, I think the interesting, there are a couple of forums, and the author of that comment may be familiar with them. It's certainly in Australia at the moment, there's a huge drive for automated mining. So BHP Billiton and others are going for the fully automated mine because that the technology is available. And again, all the challenges, if I look at their roadmap, you know, it's a bit like the automated vehicle, you know, driving. They've got this roadmap, and all of those things that are mentioned there, mapping the system, etc. What are the interdependencies? How do you optimize? What are the trade-offs, etc.? What data do you need? What confidence? What synchronicity? And then ultimately, you know, the value. What's the value proposition for the mining company as well? But you know, I think they're all there. The other thing related to value is the previous question. Is that my colleague Jez Rosenberg is currently running a fellowship with Bristol City, which is 100% about, the question was around digital twins and calculating cost, gaining resonance with citizens and preventing innovation blockers. Jez's fellowship is with the mayoral office in Bristol, asking exactly that question of how can digital twins and living labs be used by Bristol City Council to not to get the right answer, but to help provide evidence for the transition pathways. What is a pathway? How do they engineer their transitions towards where they want to be? And in particular, they're very interested in what are the things to avoid. They're not necessarily, from their perspective, it's not, well, that's the optimum, because it's very hard to identify that, but they want to avoid the things, the mistakes of the past and dead ends, etc. And in particular, you know, they you know, can it help drive innovation? Does it unblock innovation? Because you've got that evidence base for you know, the lay members and elected members of the council that can then hopefully expedite those things. So yeah, there is work on that, and it's not an easy answer, and I don't think we know the answer yet to that, but there is ongoing work exploring that.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that a little bit from my experiences. For me, digital twins aren't a specific thing that you can easily put a standard around, and that's why they've very much at the moment stayed top level. Digital twins are an approach in ways that you can pull together technology that we already have. So I don't expect standards to say you must use this architecture and this sort of thing for your particular problem, because they are so bespoke and should remain bespoke, but at least to the point of becoming interoperable with everything else. So if we can get that ability to go, this is how I want, this is the data I need, this is how I visualize it, this is how I sort of make improvements, these are the types of decisions I'd like to make from that, we can at least get to a better societal value.
Great, and I think we've got a really engaged audience there, so thank you very, very much for your questions. We've got 3 minutes. Is there any lasting words or last words that either of you would like to say?
No, it's just been a really good set of questions, and I think that those questions are, you know, are being asked now in other fora, which is really reassuring. And I think there are, as has been emphasised here, from my point of view, having been in the industry for 25 years and worked on things like interoperability, etc., you know, it comes around again and again.
Yeah,
I think the key message with digital twins is digital twins aren't for everyone. All they are is a learning loop. Some industries, it will be easy to build another layer and have a digital twin because of capital expenditure, like production, for example, that actually that's already been invested. So it's relatively easy. For other industries where they don't have that infrastructure, it's a massive capital investment. And a digital twin might not be the best solution for them. So digital twins aren't for everyone. They might need a digital shadow or just a couple of simple digital models that can actually give them significant benefits in terms of their how they learn, how they generate understanding and evidence for their product redesigns, for example, or in-service updates. But thank you all to the audience for a great set of questions.
Brilliant questions. And Jonathan, is there anything you would like to say before we go?
The same again. Thank you very much to the audience. If I could make one recommendation for anybody looking at digital twins, start with the why. Forget about the term digital twin almost to an extent and go, what am I trying to solve? And if you get round to needing synchronized data with something physical and you want to do something in the virtual space, then at that point, probably look at digital twins, see what's out there and see how other people have gone about it.
Great. So I'd like to say a very big thank you to our audience. They're so engaged and we've had lots and lots of questions, which are brilliant. But most of all, thank you, Ben, for coming off a plane and jumping onto the phone and joining us for this session. We really appreciate it. And Jonathan, we appreciate all your work and the excellent examples you brought. So we could see manufacturing was an early adopter, but we could also see lots of potential in different areas and different examples across sectors. So thank you both very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.